Psalm 19, to the choir master, a psalm of David. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom, leaving his chamber, and, like a strong man, runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them. And there is nothing hidden from its heart, from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and dippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Declare me innocent from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock, my redeemer. Grace and peace to the body that is the church. Tonight's video is going to be on Daniel. What I want to do tonight is do a general overview of the prophecies in the book of Daniel. Now, when it comes to eschatology, right, the teaching of end time events, there's one thing that we all need to agree upon, and that's the second coming of Christ bodily. Beyond that, I think there's plenty of room for differences of opinion in how we understand the text, and we should be gracious to one another when we go about studying these prophecies. Because I will admit in a couple of these chapters, namely chapter 7 and chapter 11 and 12, there's probably going to be room for improvement with my position. I don't have every single detail nailed down. There are things that I might get wrong. So whatever I say and whatever I teach on these, or whatever I explain that my position is on these, always double check it. Always go to the text. And another thing that needs to be mentioned is Daniel is not alone in the Bible, right? So these prophecies are going to be connected in some way. How we understand that may differ as well, but they may be connected and they're not separate from the rest of Scripture. So, like, for example, the book of Revelation quotes or alludes to the book of Daniel a lot. It also quotes and alludes to the book of Ezekiel, Zechariah, just as much, if not more. And so there's this connectedness with these, but there's also fulfillment in some of these things. So that's why I made a community post the other day that said, if I agree with the preterist that some things are fulfilled, and if I agree with the historicist that the book of Revelation is about history between the two advents, and if I agree with the futurist that there's going to be a future antichrist, where does that put me in with the eschatology? In other words, sometimes I don't think things are as simple as, well, all this is just going to be put in the future, or all this is going to be put in the past. There's truths to those kind of statements, but they don't encompass the whole truth, in my personal opinion. So with that being said, the first vision is here in Daniel chapter 2. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but basically Nebuchadnezzar gets a dream. And then he asked his wise men to interpret the dream. And they say, okay, tell us what the dream is and we'll interpret it for you. But he says, no, it's not how it's going to work. You tell me what the dream is and then you interpret it for me. And they basically say, okay, tell us what the dream is. And he basically says, you're not hearing what I'm telling you. You need to tell me what the dream is and what the interpretation is, or you all will be put to death. And that is all the wise men in my kingdom. And that's when Daniel steps in, and moreover, the Lord Yahweh gives him the what the vision, what the dream was, and the interpretation of it. And Daniel makes that very clear to Nebuchadnezzar that it's not my doing; it has been given to me by the Creator God, the one true living God. So, with that context, let's go down to let's see where to start. I should have been a little more prepared for this, but it's been so busy at my business, crazy busy, which is a blessing in itself, but it's given me less time to, um, probably right here, less time to study. But all right, so Daniel chapter 2, starting verse 31. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to give you my basic understanding of it. So, real quick, there is a 5 kingdom scheme in the book of Daniel, right? You'll see that here. And there's going to be chapters and visions where they focus on a certain kingdom or maybe 2 kingdoms. And then there's other visions that focus that give you all of the kingdoms, but may focus on one, or there's a vision that'll give you just one kingdom and focus on that kingdom. So I'll point those all out to you as I go along. So here in Daniel 2, starting at verse 31. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest, arms, and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly iron, partly clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold, all together were broken in pieces, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, the glory, and into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell. The children of man, the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So there's the first explanation. The gold represents the kingdom of Babylon. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. Like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, bronze, clay, the silver, the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this dream. After this, the dream is certain and its interpretation is true. So, how I understand this is that the head is Babylon, The silver is Medo Persia. The bronze is Greece, and Rome is, and the iron is Rome. Now, when it comes to the iron and clay, I'm not quite decided yet. Um, there's an interpretation that says it's the iron is the Rome, and then the clay would be the Jews, and they don't they marrying with one another, and the kingdom is not strong because of this. Right here in verse 43, where it says, "But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay." And then it says, "And in those days, in the days of those kings," so it could be the kings in the first century with the Jews and the Romans mixing together, "the God of heaven will set up a kingdom." So this is that rock. The rock is the fifth kingdom, so it's the kingdom of Christ. Now, um, my interpretation of so in the New Testament, you got a lot of you got different names for kingdoms. You right, you have the kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God. You got the messianic kingdom. You got the millennial kingdom. Um, do these all refer to different kingdoms? That's something you'll have to decide on your own. Um, I believe they all refer to the same kingdom, and it's this kingdom right here. Like it's set up during the time of Rome or the first Advent. And I believe there's strong evidence for that in the New Testament. Because remember, I believe we got to understand that the New Testament not only interprets the Old Testament, but also reveals more truth to us. Because what we're going to see is when we read through these visions, they're not giving you, like chapter 2 here does not give us all the details. It just gives us a little tiny bit. Basically gives us the kingdoms, very generally what happens there with the iron and clay, and that's it. So there's more details that need to be added. Um, but with that being said, this kingdom right here is the millennial kingdom, or maybe it's lagging. There we go. Yeah, it's lagging. So this kingdom that's set up that is the rock is Christ's kingdom, or the messianic, or the millennial kingdom, and that started, from my position, it started the first advent, and it's going to end the second advent. So what that is called what people prefer is called realized or inaugurated millennium, but it's commonly called amillennialism. Now, what needs to be pointed out as well too is that I will be taking a most likely it is going to be a minority position on a lot of these. Daniel 8 won't be a minority position, but for a lot of these, I will be holding to a minority position. I do understand that. There are other positions like futurism that is a lot more popular. But I don't see, for example, I don't see here in chapter 2 where there's a gap between um, the iron and the clay and the rock. So it says here, um, I'll start reading verse 40. "And there shall be a fourth kingdom." So this is after Greece. So this has to be Rome. "Strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron, it shall break and crush all these." So all these, I would assume, refer to the previous uh, kingdoms. "And as you saw the feet of toes, the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom." And so, whether this is during the empire itself, where there's infighting, or um, this is with the Jews mingling with Rome, which seems to be more likely. But I'm not 100% one way or the other. But I go on. "But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes and feet were partly iron and clay, so the kingdom, that is the fourth kingdom, I believe, shall be partly strong and partly brittle. And you saw iron mix with soft clay, so they will mix one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, so the kingdom will fall apart, just as iron does not mix with clay. Now, this that kind of also makes me wonder if this is referring to when did the Western Roman Empire fall? I'm sure there's various dates. Um, I can't remember off the top of my head. I know this can be wrong, with 300 AD or something like that, somewhere around there. No, 400s. Anyways, it might be referring all the way up to those times. But but then but then you got this next verse. And in days of those kings, well, okay, so you got in the days of those kings. So if this does refer to all the way up until Rome fell, this right here in the days of those kings could be referring to that whole time period. It says the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. So when we think about setting up a kingdom, it's not going to happen instantly. It's going to build up, build up, build up, build up, build up. And what we see in the New Testament, not only does it be built up, but then it gets persecuted, and it decreases for a while, and then it increases even more. Then it decreases, and then it increases even more. We'll see that pattern in the New Testament. There's this tension in the New Testament with um, the battle between the two kingdoms. You have the kingdom of God, or the millennial kingdom, or Christ's kingdom, the messianic kingdom, and you have Satan's kingdom. In the New Testament, there is a growth, and there's nothing that the kingdom of Satan can do to stop the growth. Only thing it can do is to physically harm the citizens of that kingdom, which does not actually do anything, because when we die, we go and continue to rule and reign with God in heaven. So it could be either the first century, or it could be all the way up until Rome fell. But regardless, this kingdom being set up is definitely the millennial kingdom, in my opinion. It's Christ's kingdom. And this kingdom shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So this almost makes you think of, like, well, if it was in the first century, then that happened in the first century only. The kingdom was set up and broke and destroyed all of the kingdoms. Well, that doesn't have to really be the case, because we have more revelation than just Daniel 2. So I wouldn't say that that's exactly what that's saying. So just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain, remember Christ was called what? The stone that the builders rejected. He's the cornerstone. Interesting. You saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. So it's like he's breaking the gold, the Babylonian kingdom, the Medo-Persia kingdom, the Greek kingdom, the uh, Roman kingdom. But really, only Rome was around then. Well, maybe that's kind of shown us that each kingdom inherited uh, the previous kingdom's status and power and those kind of things. That could be what it's referring to. And when we have in the book of Revelation, it has what we'll see in Daniel 7. It has the same scheme. So Daniel 2 has a different metals. Daniel 7 refers to the same kingdoms, but it uses very very, very strong pictures of different beasts to describe these same kingdoms here. What the book of Revelation does is it takes all of those kingdoms, all four of them, and combines them into one. So that kind of makes me think that the amillennial position is true, not only because of but all four of these kingdoms combined shows that there's this beast system throughout. Whenever Revelation says this is happening, which my position is the two advents, you have this beast system that's trying to become a one world power, but it's not it's not fulfilling that mission until um, what we could call the Great Tribulation, even though I wouldn't use that word technically, but um, the last Great Tribulation, right before Christ's return, is when that is realized and that beast system um, becomes a one world power and all that goes down and then Christ returns. But all right, so let's go to chapter 7. So Daniel 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, the four winds of heaven, we usually think of um, points on a compass, right? North, south, east, west. But if you, I made a community post about this the other day. If in the book of Revelation, it is chapter 7, the four winds are mentioned, or the four angels are holding back the four winds. And it doesn't really make sense uh, for it to be referring just to north, south, east, and west. What's interesting is when we go to winds, it's ruach, so spirit or wind. So another way to say this is that, behold, the four spirits of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, um, if that's the case, because it doesn't really make sense that the four compass, the points on the compass, is stirring up the great sea. That just doesn't make sense to me. So the four spirits, or could be the spirits, could be angels, um, or spirit beings of some type of angelic being. But the four spirits of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, what the great sea? Both of these are used in the book of Revelation. And the sea, usually with this kind of language, refers to beastly Gentile nations. Persecuting beastly Gentile nations is what that refers to. And they come out of the sea. The sea, because the sea represents what? It represents chaos, death. No man can go in there and live. Um, they will all die unless rescued. Because notice here, the four spirits of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. And so I don't think it's just, and why that's important as well too is because this shows the sovereignty of God over all these things, that even though they do evil, he uses these, ultimately, in my opinion, that he uses these for good. But the four winds would probably not be evil spirits either. It would probably be, I guess you could, good spirits, uh, good angelic hosts. So these four beasts come out of the sea, and they're all different from one another. That kind of makes me think as well too. Each one uh, kind of amalgamates, to use that term for SDAs who are listening. It amalgamates into themselves these differences from the previous kingdoms. The first was like a lion. So this first one is going to be synonymous with the head of gold. So the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. So that's referring to the Babylonian kingdom. And very, very possible that this right here could be referring to what happened to the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, when he's turned into a beast. Maybe that doesn't. Maybe that means something else. I'm not sure. Anyways, verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. So this is going to be the Medo-Persian kingdom. And notice here, it was told, arise, devour much flesh. So something or someone is telling this kingdom to arise. Could it be the four winds or the four spirits telling these kingdoms to arise and do as they must? Uh, verse 6. So that's the Medo Persia kingdom. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, with four wings of a bird on his back, and the beast had four heads, and dominion was given to it. So this is the kingdom of Greece, the four wings representing most likely the four horns in Daniel 8, the same thing, the splitting up of the kingdom of Greece after Alexander the Great died to his four generals. That's probably what that's referring to. Um, or it could be the four heads here. But either way, this is the kingdom of Greece. You notice we'll notice here in chapter 7, 8, maybe 9, and then 11 and 12, the main focus of these visions are not the first uh, two kingdoms. They're the third and fourth kingdom, each one focusing more on one or the other, which is interesting. Um, Verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast. So here's the iron, or Rome, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. Something that's what I was trying to think of what I wanted to mention while I was talking. Notice here in the Greek kingdom, dominion was given to it. Who or what gave it dominion? Could it be uh, the Creator, the one true living God? Maybe. Some people might think maybe it was Satan, but I think it might be the the former one, because the four winds, I do believe, are not demonic beings, especially when you see it in the book of Revelation. It's definitely not demonic beings. Anyways, this fourth beast was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which three of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. So, okay, so this is the fourth kingdom. This is Rome. And so these horns could be kings or kingdoms coming out of the uh, fourth beast, or Rome. Now, could this be referring to the iron and clay? Which kind of why I mentioned this could be referring to all the way up to when Rome fell, which is, I believe, 400 and something. I could be off on that date. Um, possibly, possibly. Like I said in the opening, I'm not dogmatic on these things. I mean, I think people have good points. The historicists have good points. I'm not too familiar with the futurist position on Daniel 7, although I don't really see futurism in the scriptures at all, to be honest with you, except for a few details like not even how they understand it, but the Antichrist at the end. There will be a man of sin, a final man of sin, or a final Antichrist. One thing I do need to point out too is I do believe the book of Daniel here gives us a good example of what prophecy can do. That is, it repeats, and so when it's fulfilled, it's not fully fulfilled. There's still a future application to be made with it. And I think that happens with some of these prophecies here in the book of Daniel. That yes, there are a historical, real fulfillment of it, but the New Testament, I believe, does use them and say that there is a future application to be made with some of them. So that's something we need to keep in mind when we do read the book of Daniel as well, too. So notice here he gives the four beasts, and then what does he do? He goes to this judgment scene by the Ancient of Days. One second. All right, he goes to this judgment scene here, and I'll read it real quick. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fury flames. Its wheels were burning fire. It's interesting. Listening to a stream earlier, his throne had wheels on it in the Adventist system. I'm not sure if every single Adventist pastor teaches this, but I definitely heard them throughout my years. They believe that since these wheels are on this throne, that this is how they explain the movement from the holy to the most holy place in 1844. So God's throne was not always in the most holy place. It wasn't there until 1844. So that's a little side note, kind of reading that, kind of chuckling myself. Verse 10. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. So these books were open. And notice this judgment here, because this is where the Adventists say that the investigative judgment starts right here. This judgment is placed upon the beasts. But in the Adventist scheme, this judgment is placed upon believers, which is interesting. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. So probably that little horn in verse 8 here. And as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. So notice this beast here is destroyed or killed. I wonder what that word killed is. Why am I not seeing it? Oh, here it is, destroyed. Okay, destroyed, perish. Looks like this word is used. Oh, yeah, because this is still Aramaic. Okay, yeah, okay. All right, that's why. That's why it's only used. I wonder what the Hebrew equivalent would be. To perish, destroy, to be destroyed. Yeah, okay. The beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. So that could be referring to the dominion, okay, of the beast. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Notice that. So their dominion is taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Now, could that be what the book of Revelation is expounding upon, at least in part? That the beast's dominion has been taken away, and they prolong for a season and a time. That's interesting. Because clearly the beast system will still be around, but it's just not dominant over the whole world. That's what these four beasts will represent, as beastly domination over the whole world, which we will see in the book of Revelation. It culminates at the end, right before Christ's second coming. So you have this judgment scene on the beast system. And then you have this right here. Notice this is right after the four beast system is given. So think about in Daniel 2, you had the four metals, and then the rock came. So verse 13 and 14 here is that rock. The same thing, just talking about it differently. It says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven. So notice that clouds of heaven here. I believe this is referring to the ascension of Christ. I made a video about this as well too, so I won't go into that much detail. But clouds in heaven are only used a couple of times in the New Testament, and it refers to the first coming mainly, or the second coming. Those two is what it refers to. So here, behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. Christ is who I say that is. And he came, notice he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. So he's coming to the Ancient of Days, or the Father in heaven, and was presented to him, which is why I believe this is the first coming. Notice this. Notice here. Dominion to him was given, that is, Son of Man or Christ, was given dominion, a glory, and a kingdom. What are we told in Revelation 1? We're told that we are a kingdom of priests to God. And in Matthew 28, Christ says he has all power and authority. It says it in a couple places in the book of Revelation that we are a kingdom and priest to God. That all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, referring to that even though at the second coming it'll just be consummated or completed. It won't end. And his kingdom, one that shall not be destroyed. So no matter how many of us they kill and they murder and they slaughter, this kingdom will never cease to be. There will always be people, Christians in this world who are the kingdom of God. It doesn't matter if there's 100 of us only in China, or only in Arabia, or only in Japan. The kingdom is there. And that's what I find so, when you're in these cult systems, so Adventism, Mormons, whatever, they all teach varying degrees of this, but they all teach that there is a great apostasy that happened in the first couple centuries of the church, and that a restoration needed to happen. And this happens, depending on the scheme, happens over time, or happens when the prophet or prophetess comes. That's not what this teaches. This teaches what? That his dominion is an everlasting one, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Now, Christ said in, where is it? I can't remember. But in one of the Gospels, Christ says that hell will not prevail against his kingdom. Pretty clear, there was no great apostasy, yet there were always wolves. We were told there will always be wolves in sheep's clothing. There will always be ministers that are Satan's minions that will masquerade as ministers of light. But when you're in his kingdom will not disappear regardless of that. So, anyways. Verse 15, as for me, Daniel, my spirit within me, I'm going to go kind of fast because I'm starting to get a little tired, and I still have a couple chapters to get to in the video. I might actually leave it at that and go to the next one. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So here is the interpretation of the vision that was just given. This is the interpretation of it, and it goes into more details. Now, it could be, I think here in chapter 7, I think this might be one of those visions that gives a little more detail that spans out to his second coming. That's my feeling on this one. Not dogmatic about it, but I think there's a lot more evidence for that here as opposed to Daniel 2, where it just shows the kingdom and it's everlasting, and that's about it. Excuse me. All right, Daniel 8. So I made a number of videos on Daniel 8, so I won't go into great detail. This Daniel 8 is focused on the third kingdom. That is the leopard and bronze. And so only what's mentioned here is the second kingdom. It's only mentioned in 2 verses. That's it. The rest of this is all focused on the Greek Empire, the third kingdom. And it refers to the events of the little horn and what he does to the sanctuary. And that happens because of the transgressions of the Jews. And we know from books like First, Second Maccabees, that the Jews were whoring around with the Greek Empire. And there was even Jews that were giving loyalty to um, Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. So they were setting up gymnasiums, which, if you understand the gymnasiums back then, it's not like YMCA here. Okay, they were playing sports butt naked. There's this pagan stuff going on. It was clearly an affront to and a whoring to the pagan deities, which I do believe that they are demonic or fallen angelic beings. I do not believe that they are just made up. Um, is it possible some of them are? Maybe, but I think most, if not all of them, are uh, fallen angelic beings. But anyways, that's what this vision here refers to, is that the punishment of the Jews by Antiochus Epiphanes of the Fourth, that was laid out by God because of the whoring that Israel did with Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. Chapter 9 refers to a time prophecy that points to the coming Messiah in the fourth kingdom. So it starts with the restoration in the second kingdom of physical Israel and the physical land, the physical sanctuary and all that. And the time prophecy ends in the fourth kingdom, that is Rome, that is the lion, the not the lion, but the super scary beast, the very ferocious one. That's when this ends. So I don't need to say too much because I've made videos on this as well too. So chapter 11 has an insane amount of historical details. I'm not going to get into pretty much any of those. 'Cause I could do a whole video on just the details of chapter 11. It'll be like an hour long. There's a lot of details. Basically, it starts, in my opinion, it has that five kingdom scheme, but it starts with the second kingdom. And I think that's pretty clear because here in verse 2, it says, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. So clearly it's the second kingdom. It says, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has risen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided. So that's referring to the third. So already from verse 2 to 3, it shifts from the second kingdom, or the silver kingdom, to the bronze kingdom. And this is referring to Alexander the Great. So notice the similarities, the same, the parallelism. So there's differences of opinions on when the transition, or there's even some that believe the rest of this is about the third kingdom and that's it. Even chapter 12, I do not hold that position. I do believe it goes into the fourth and fifth kingdom. So there's difference of opinion on where the transition happens. I do know that Adventist scholars teach that verse 22 is referring to the same Prince of the Covenant, chapter 9, which would be Messiah. So they believe this fourth kingdom here, which is pretty crazy to me, but because I believe this is still the third kingdom. And this could be referring to the covenant that the Jews made with Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Again, First, Second Maccabees records this as a historical fact. Just another reason why the whoring that they're doing was punishable. Where I believe the transition happens, and this goes through um, details of the activities of the third kingdom between like the Egyptian kingdom and the Seleucid kingdom, in a lot of details. Honestly, it's pretty amazing. But I believe the transition to the fourth kingdom most likely happens here in verse 36. And it's kind of hard because here, verse 35. Well, no, it kind of makes sense. It says here in verse 35, and some of the wise shall stumble. That is the believing Jews, most likely, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. So here, then in verse 36, it transitions to the fourth activities that happen within the fourth kingdom. That is Rome, or iron, or the ferocious beast. Now, my position on this is definitely be different than most, but I do believe that this description from here, verse 36, all the way down to the end, verse 45, refers to the activities mainly also of the Roman legions and armies, but mainly it's focused on the Jews, and especially the activities of somebody called John of Giscala. If you have not heard of him, I would recommend reading about him in Wars of the Jews by Antiochus, Wars of the Jews by Josephus. I believe it's book 4 that goes through all the details of John of Giscala. Josephus actually had uh, interaction with him to try to persuade him to stop doing what he was doing. He was sent by Vespasian, I believe, and so he knows. He's explaining what happens, and these details here. For example, and the king shall do as he wills. This king here would be John of Giscala. So when you read, he exalted himself. He self-appointed himself as the ruling monarch over uh, Israel during these activities. And the activities were what? They were things from um, plundering, pillaging, uh, bandit type activity, murdering, slaughtering the priesthood, even though the priesthood was not legitimate then, but slaughtering those priesthood and the high priest, destroying the sanctuary, destroying the furniture in the sanctuary, turning the most holy place into a fortress. He was taking cedar beams and reinforcing it, um, uniting with the Edomites to take over the Jews that were against him. His men he allowed to rape women. Um, he allowed them to do homosexual activities, to cross dress, do all the stuff in the sanctuary and around the sanctuary. Um, he cared nothing. He was because so when it first happened, and he came. So when Rome was taking over the the towns of Israel, Giscala, the town of Giscala, which is part of Galilee, was the last one of the last ones in that area to be taken, and John and his men fled because Rome was taking over there. And actually, when that happened, he abandoned the women and children there, which shows you kind of a pattern of when it talks about. It's like here in verse 37, the KJV renders it better. It says, "Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers." So, God of his fathers, that phrase is used, from what I understand in Scripture, only of Yahweh. So, the God of the Jews, the fathers of the Jews. So he has no regard for Yahweh. That was very, very true. He could care less about that God of Yahweh or any other God, nor the desire of women. So he, like I said, he raped a lot of men to rape women. He slaughtered them. He used them as bait and as meat shields. It just he was a vile, wicked, vile person. So that I was going somewhere with that, and I kind of sometimes I go off rabbit trails and I keep going, I forget what my original point was. But this all refers to his activity because also when you read about what happened with John. Oh, yeah, I was talking about when he fled. So when he fled from Giscala, he came to the Jews, the high priest Ananus, and the Jews that were there. And he lied to them and said, well, you know what? Uh, we pushed Rome back. They didn't take over Galilee. And Josephus comments that the Jews were not buying it because the way they were behaving, they were acting in fear, they were out of breath because they're running away. And it wasn't the out of breath type that was just like, oh man, that was an enjoyable run, or an excited out of breath because we had just conquered Rome in this battle. It was a running and out of breath of fear and anxiety. And so, but he ended up convincing people, and he hung around with these Jews who he actually would turn on, because there were other zealot groups like Eleazar and his group that were doing their thing as well too, that was killing people and all that kind of stuff. But John would play both sides for a while, so he was really good at lying and convincing people he was on their side. Like, he took oaths to convince the Jews that he was on their side, and like those oaths meant nothing to him. He could care less. So once you read the events of in book 4 about John and Giscala, it becomes pretty clear, in my personal opinion, that all of this refers to the activities of what him and his men did. So verse 12 is the fourth kingdom. Verse 1 through 4 is the fourth kingdom, or the rock, that brings an everlasting righteousness and all that. And then you have the end of the vision, and to shut up the seal, and shut up and to conceal this vision. And then down here, you have a couple of time prophecies. You have here in verse 11, it says, "And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1290 days." So that refers to what John of Giscala did, in my personal opinion. And we know from the time that it was 1290 days. So then it says, blessed is he who waits and arrives at 1335 days. And that possibly could be referring to those who fled. Remember when Jesus said, pray that your flight not be on the Sabbath or in winter? Talking about those days, talking about these days right here. This could be referring to those who fled and they were to wait longer than 1290, but 1335 days, because they are blessed from this, because they survived this desolation, this abomination, this desolation. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest, and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. So that almost makes me think that this also could be, 'cause remember I talked about, even though some of these have a historical fulfillment, that may not exhaust the prophecy completely. So there could be a more complete fulfillment of this in the book of Revelation, possibly. But that is my general overview of these prophecies of the book of Daniel. I appreciate everybody listening. I'm going to read some comments and see what's going on. A lot of comments, actually. Man, I wasn't even expecting all these comments. Man, I appreciate you guys watching, or watching, I should say watching. I appreciate you guys listening to my breakdown of the book of Daniel. What's going on, brother Chris? Colin, man, how you doing? It's good to see you. It's always good to see you around, man. No, not everyone agrees that the second coming is our future. Some believe he returned when he said he would before his generation passed. Yeah, but I do believe that is a heretical teaching, and I don't think anyone in the early church who had contact with the apostles had that understanding. So that alone tells me that it is a faulty understanding, and actually a heretical one. So I would disagree with those people completely. And I understand what they're saying. They're saying he came back not physically, but in judgment and salvation. We know which kingdom was present when God set it up. Rome. Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah, probably Nero. Yeah, there were Edomites and Jews and people marrying and intermarrying in those times. So a troll comment. I don't even know your name, brother. You have to let me know sometime. So, Gospel Christ Ministries, how you doing? Good to see ya. Do a live stream. What would you like to do a live stream on? Maybe for a little bit, but it's starting to get late here, and I gotta get up early to start my. I run my own business, so. But maybe, I mean, if you're still here, comment. Let me know what you'd like to do it on. I might listen more than talk. 'Cause the more tired I get, uh, the less I talk, and the more I listen. Most of the Roman Empire was loyal to Rome. Exception of the Jews, most of the Roman Empire was loyal to Rome. Yeah, yeah, probably more or less. I'm sure there's more that were not. I mean, front value probably, but I mean, when you're a conquered nation, you're only going to like that conqueror so much. Yeah, I would disagree wholeheartedly with the full preterist, and the full preterist position I do believe is a heretical one. So I'm gonna skim through these. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's every single early church father. I do not know of a single one, and these are guys that, like the apostolic fathers. These are guys that had contact with and learned under and worshipped with the apostles. Not a single one taught that his second coming happened in 70 AD. What full preterism does, it forces everything into 70 AD, and it's an overreach in my opinion. Way overreach. I mean, there's things that sound like that they are only fulfilled in 70 AD, but I do not believe that every single thing was. That also assumes that the book of Revelation is just a commentary on the Old Testament. It doesn't give us any further revelation. Sign New Jerusalem or heavenly places. You do know that being used as a claim she was racist is probably the biggest reason I can't take a person serious if they actually think that was saying something bad. Oh yeah, yeah, the amalgamation. It's possible she was. I don't think there's some evidence she might have been just a person of her time and um, was not, I would say, overly racist. But she had some, how do I word this? Maybe negative leanings towards black people back then. She said some very funky things and some um, things that don't seem right. But that's not what this stream is about. I just thought it was kind of funny saying that more than anything. The four winds seem to be a general calamity at the end of the day that God is sovereign over. Well, remember the four winds and the four horsemen, Daniel 6 and 7, or Daniel 6, Revelation 6 and 7, come from where? They come from Zechariah 6 and Ezekiel 38 and 30, or 37 to 39. And the four horsemen are called four spirits, four winds. So it's interesting when these beasts are talked about. How can how can the general direction of the north, south, east, west arouse these beasts to come out of the sea? It doesn't make sense to me. Yes, I agree. Which the historicists will say that Rome persists through which that very well could be. I have no issue with saying that Rome is beast system. I have no issue saying, but what I differ on is that Rome is the only beast system between the two advents. I do believe there are multiple beast systems that go around in the two advents. Um, we see this just in history. Um, I forget the organization, but the organization did studies and found that Christians, even recent times, are the most persecuted people group in the whole world. We have brothers and sisters in countries that are being and have been slaughtered while we sit here and spend leisure hours on YouTube and enjoy the fatness of our bellies. So it's go tell one of them that tribulation has not come yet, that kind of stuff. But it's very likely that the Rome beast system, which is papal, would be the papal system, uh, kind of died down, lost power after a while, and will rise and be the very last, very end uh, beast system. I'm okay with that. I have no issues with being the case. I think there's going to be more than just that because you have the UN, World Economic Forum, uh, uh, Council of Foreign Relations, those kind of things that would need to play in there too. But futurists are too loose and sloppy. Yeah, I don't see a gap in there as well, which is very right. Yeah. I'm sure you remember that I was raised Adventist, so I'm familiar with their position on it. Yeah. Daniel 8 is very clearly about the third kingdom, very clearly. Daniel 7 and Daniel 11 Daniel 11 has the second, third, and fourth beast system in there. That very clearly does, which also follows Daniel 7, right? Because Daniel 7 has first, second, third, and fourth. I think Chat GPT, I don't even know what that is. Chat GPT? I have no. Speaking French to me, man. Good to see you, Kelvy. Is the beast who speaks, because I also thought the bottomless pit. That's good. Oh, yes. Oh, man. The internet is the bottomless pit. Oh, no doubt. That is pretty good. That's pretty funny. I like that. That is good. Uh, that is why you're an Adventist. Well, you're probably an Adventist more so because you were raised it and your family is it, and it's very hard to leave Adventism when your whole family is Adventist. It's very hard. Oh man, yeah, it's kind of interesting what's happening now with those two banks. I can't remember the names of the banks, but it's interesting stuff that's happening right now. First Corinthians 15. I'm not sure what you're referring to on this, but I'll tell you what. First Corinthians 15 is one of the reasons why I might do a video on this, but First Corinthians 15 is one of the reasons why I do not hold to premillennialism at all. I might do a video on why I do not hold to premillennialism. But then I want to do a video as well on what is stuff like what is the gospel in Adventism and what Ellen G. White says about those who reject present truth, which refers to their understanding of the three angels message and all that stuff. Watch next week he does it. uh, like the abolitionist Presbyterian. Actually, one of the first abolitionists was a Presbyterian, but not all of them were. Yeah, no doubt. There were those throughout Christian history as a whole who accepted slavery and just taught that you are to treat the slaves well. And there were those who, like Gregory of Nicaea, was against slavery, and I would be on his side. And with what was that Presbyterian guy's name? Was it starts with an S? Was it Samuel? Anyways, he was a reformed guy in the 1700s here in America, and he was one of the first abolitionists. Uh, which I mean, I would have been abolitionist, but especially since I'm not, I'm a mixed child, anyways. But it's easier said than done when you're back then. You have that slavery system going on, it takes everything. Look how the South reacted when Abraham Lincoln was uh, going to become president. I mean, crazy times. I mean, I would have fought. I would have fought for the freeing of the slaves, no doubt. Maybe I would have went about it a different way. I don't know, but I would definitely would have fought for them. John and his contemporaries. Well, right, everything was written in the first century, but I don't believe it's applied only to the first century. That's like saying stuff that was written in the Old Testament in the past was written only to them. I believe God can write things in the first century, but then it can be applied prophetically in the future. I don't believe God was just wanting to deal with 70 AD and that's it. We are talking about the creator of heaven and earth. What do you want to talk about? I'll scroll to the end here. Man, a lot of comments. Brandon, what's going on, brother? How are you doing? Good to see you. Kevin, how you doing, man? I was listening to Graham's live stream with Miles a little bit earlier. It was an enjoyable show. I was at work, so I was in and out a lot. But when that when that Brandon guy was talking, and I heard him talking about the Bible is God or whatever, I was like, I'm done. That's wild stuff. It's got to be let's see if gospel. What's his name? Gospel. I forget it. Sorry. Gospel of Christ Ministries. If you're still here, what would you like to do a live stream on? If you want to do something, um, like I said, I might not talk a lot because I'm starting to get tired and just stumbling over my words, and I'll probably say stupid stuff all the time. That's what I do when I get tired. Uh, because I already know you aren't thinking of it properly. Oh, okay. I thought you were talking to me. Okay. Jesus comes in the clouds, digital Jesus. Yeah, yeah, there you go. It is hard to leave the truth. Well, considering that by that standard, nobody actually had full truth until 1844 investigative judgment, which is quite silly. And that's what all those 19th century cults did is they said we are being given truth. Truth that apparently the church for 1800 years never had. It's an absurd notion if you think about it. So I'm not sure if Gospel of Christ Ministries is here. I'm gonna give him like one more minute, and if he doesn't comment, I'm just gonna end the live stream. I do appreciate everybody listening to my ramblings and thoughts on the book of Daniel. Yeah, I'll leave that up. See if he comments. If he comments, maybe we'll do a live stream on whatever he wants to do it on. I'm gonna skim through these comments. Has aspects of previous one. Yeah, I agree. She has to be a whore. She was an abolitionist, so it is questionable if any writer after 1780 ever meant. No, I disagree. There's no reason why they want it. They look at how far Paul alone went with the gospel. Thousands and thousands of people were converted and were in churches. I mean, unless we think that the apostles were in a box and nobody talked to them. I mean, we have Eusebius writing down uh, that Jude's grandson, a quote from him, and it seems to sound kind of like the amillennial position, generally speaking. Obviously, they didn't use those kind of terms and think those that kind of way, but it's actually very reasonable. And actually, I assume it, I believe it to be true that these Christian writers, Polycarp, Clement of Rome, Irenaeus, Ignatius, these kind of gentlemen, not only had contact but learned from the apostles, and then like Irenaeus and Ignatius, they would have learned from those who learned from the apostles, like Polycarp and Clement and those guys. The Epistle of Barnabas, who wrote that, I mean, there's no reason to think that they had no contact with the apostle whatsoever. That's actually Quite a silly assertion, in my personal opinion. Although I do respect you, Dan, I think that is silly to think that way. Uh, they went in and out of prison, um, but they definitely had contact, and so I think I'm going to end this because he's not commenting. Maybe Gospel of Christ Ministry, just message me and we can figure out a stream we could do sometime. Anyways, grace and peace to everybody. God bless.